Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Really excited to talk to you guys today about Cisco's App-first security solution. I'm not going to go ahead and waste time reading this really esoteric title here, so we're just going to focus on App-first security. I'm Randy Birdsall. I'm a Director of Technical Marketing Engineering, or like I like to say, a techie here at Cisco. I've been all over Cisco within 15 years, always cutting code, whether that's in the collaboration group, IoT group, or now in security. And my focus is how do we transition from old world technology to the new world of software and cloud delivered applications? And how do we make sure that we can secure them as they make that transition? And this is really important because applications are fundamental to businesses these days. It's been proved time and time again that the businesses that can digitize can move fast. But to do that, it requires a ton of change. And you guys understand this, right? Who is taking responsibility for different parts of applications has dramatically shifted, even in security. We're seeing app teams without security expertise starting to make security decisions. We're seeing applications move from on-premise data centers into the cloud. You guys know that, that's nothing new. But with that mentality, there also is an adoption of new technologies that accelerate the development velocity. So now applications are rolling out faster than anyone can keep pace with, especially the security teams. And so you end up with this whole new world order that is really difficult to have security be able to apply the same level of visibility and control that it used to. So the only way that we can keep up is start moving security further up the stack, going from infrastructure to layer 7 to runtime, eventually to cut and code. It's that whole shift left mentality, right? Completely applies to security as well. And if you don't do that, you're going to end up behind the 8 ball. Next, we have to make sure that we're considering that as businesses shift to applications as being so fundamental to their differentiation in the market and how they generate revenue, you've got to make sure that you're taking into consideration the app team's needs as well as the security teams. Because if one team ignores the other, there's going to be tension, there's going to be friction. At the end of the day, it's going to cause further delay in either reducing your risk or being able to get features out into the market. So the products have to work for both teams. And then lastly, you've got to shift earlier in the development lifecycle. Security has to be something that is thought of before even any bit of code is written, instead of all the way until it's been shipped, and now we've got to go bolt security on after the fact. It's got to be part of that continuous development lifecycle. Now, as that process kind of unfolds, there's going to be 4 key areas you're going to want to evaluate, and that Cisco's taken to heart as places where we need to spend some time. And we've got, first, adaptive application segmentation. As applications get decoupled and decentralized and microservice architectures are exploding, and the proliferation of Kubernetes, you basically have these applications that are so dynamic that if you had to go and define segmentation policy by hand, it would never work. You've got to automate it, and you've got to have a solution that's going to be able to adapt as your application adapts. Next, you have to be able to detect when you've got vulnerabilities in your workloads, no matter where they exist, whether that's the public cloud or on premises, and you've got to be able to detect when there's exploits that are happening on those workloads and be able to do some forensic analysis as to what's happened. And that doesn't matter if it's container, doesn't matter if it's bare metal. You need to have visibility across all of your workload types. And then you want to have visibility into the actual cloud infrastructure that you've got where these applications could be running. And you want to have it across multiple clouds, because I'm going to guess that your applications don't just run in AWS or GCP or Azure. They're going to run in one or more of them. And you want to make sure that you have visibility as to what's happening and going in and out of those applications. What is the underlying configuration of that infrastructure? Are you exposing yourselves to any unnecessary risk? Or is there any threats that are happening within that environment? You want to be able to be agnostic as to where that application and where it moves within those environments. And when you've got those 4 pillars kind of identified and laid down, then you've got a really strong foundation to start moving security up the application stack. That's the exact mentality that we're going out and trying to get our customers to understand, and it's really having tremendous success for them. And I think the one way we like to think about it as a bunch of techies is with a stack, right? Stack diagrams are the way that we kind of have viewed the world through a stack lens. So let's go through a stack going from cloud infrastructure all the way up to users and where those solutions fit in. So if we take the cloud infrastructure piece of it, you're going to want to have your infrastructure threat detection at that layer. We have StealthWatch Cloud as a product that can help with that. We've got at the compute and OS layer, you're going to want to have your workload segmentation and your app segmentation handled. Workload security and app segmentation handled. Tetration gets you covered there. Then you move to the next layer, and you've got in the app layer, you're going to want to make sure that your application is performant and that it's behaving as you'd expect it, and there's no anomalous behavior. Or if something were to happen, that you could actually dive into code level diagnostics to figure out what actually occurred, whether it's security, incident, or performance. That's where AppDynamics comes in. And then there's a data layer, obviously an important layer, but nothing that Cisco has to offer in that space just yet. But then in the final layer, you've got the user part of the stack where we're providing multi-factor authentication and software-defined access controls for your devices being provided by Duo. So these 4 products kind of come together to solve for those use cases we talked about, and what we kind of coin as application-first security. If we think about what does that actually mean, because it sounds like a bunch of fluffy stuff so far, like let's talk about an example architecture. Here you've got a typical application environment where you're leveraging both public cloud and your private cloud. And your private cloud is where you're doing your development, where you've got your artifacts stored, your build pipeline is there, and that environment needs to be secured. And then you've got your public cloud where your application is actually operating, so you can leverage the benefit of scale within your public cloud providers. And both, or all of those kind of use cases we talked about apply to both of those clouds, and you want a tool that be able to span all of them. So you're going to want your public cloud threat detection and your private network threat detection being fed into the same source. And then you can correlate information across those to understand the complete threat landscape within your application. You're going to want to secure access for your DevOps teams that are either managing the product, building the product, whether that's in the private cloud or the public cloud. You're also going to want to secure the users that are accessing these enterprise applications with MFA, and that's where Duo can come in. We've got this application is actually running in Kubernetes, as you can see. And within Kubernetes, the east-west traffic is really important between all those pods where your microservices are running. And it's important, but it's also really hard to get visibility there. So we provide all of the tools, and all those use cases apply within a Kubernetes environment, whether you're doing threat detection with StealthWatch Cloud, your segmentation and workload security with Tetration for a zero trust public cloud deployment, whether you're doing your application tracing for visibility within application performance, as well as your threat incident response and your postmortems for your forensic analysis. And then, of course, securing access to those DevOps teams. So this is the kind of world that application-first security lives in. And I want to make this real for you. And we've done it in a couple of ways. First off, we have just recently released within DevNet a complete learning track around application-first security so that you can ramp up on Cisco technology and how it applies to modern application development and the public cloud. And so that learning track has about 20 labs in it. It's about 10 hours of content, and we've already got a roadmap to add at least another few hours within the next month or so. And then we've also created sandboxes so you can get hands-on with products like Tetration, StealthWatch Cloud, AppDynamics, and Duo, and actually see what these products look like, feel like, and then take the learning that you've done and incorporate it with those sandboxes. So that's what I want to show you. So I'm going to switch over to the demo now. Here, we've got the learning labs I was talking about, 20 learning labs over 10 hours. And right at the top is where I'm going to focus in, and that's the Cisco App First Security Lab in AWS. This is kind of the everything but the kitchen sink, where you can get hands-on with all of the products in AWS and understand how do you secure the AWS public cloud environment, how do you secure Kubernetes, how do you secure your application with all of these products using those use cases we referred to. And so if you were to dive into this learning lab, what's going to happen right out of the gate is you're going to want to go ahead and reserve a sandbox. So one of the sandboxes that we've created is the Cisco Application First Security sandbox. You go ahead and reserve that. When you do reserve this, in the background, we are spinning up dedicated instances within our products, which are all offered via SaaS, and dedicating them for you to run through those labs and learn. When you spin up that sandbox, you get a few emails that'll tell you your next steps and get you started and give you your credentials. Once you have all those, you're eventually going to end up at this repository. And this is a bit of a new model that we're doing with DevNet in collaboration with the security group, is offering a lab that is actually run and operated all through within AWS. And we have a repo that contains a ton of really interesting things for you to learn and play with and use during the lab. But one of the things that's really going to be important to get kickstarted here, and this is all guided, you're guided through all of this in the learning labs, is going to be a CloudFormation template, which is how we kick everything off in AWS. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy the Git for this, and then switch over here. And we're going to just do a git clone to get that repo down. And now that I've got this repo accessible on my local machine, I can go over to AWS and I can go ahead and start the CloudFormation process. Now, what happens when you create a CloudFormation stack is it'll go out and configure your entire AWS environment. So we've provided a template which will keep all of our resources isolated and not mixed in with the resources that you've created, so that when you run this in your AWS environment, there's no harm or impact. And it actually gets everything ready to go for you to run the lab. So go ahead, we can step through this process. It's going to ask for some parameters. These are all provided in your email that you'll get from the sandbox. And I'll just put some dummy values in there for now. We're just going to scroll down to the bottom here, say that we are going to allow this CloudFormation template to go ahead and create the stack, and then off it goes. And at this point, it's going to start creating everything necessary to run through this lab. All right, now that CloudFormation has spun up my AWS infrastructure, including Cloud9 IDE, where I'll be running this lab, I'm going to go ahead and search for that in the Management Console and open up that IDE environment that it created for me. Within this IDE environment, you're going to have access to that repo that I was sharing before with all of those files, but they've actually been customized and tailored towards your exact lab and your environment. So there's going to be a bunch of like environment variable replacement happening. So this is actually completely tailored to your experience. It's really helpful when we take a look at the lab guide. We've gone in and custom built all of the components within the lab guide to replace, for instance, with your AWS region and the user name that you used and your password that you used to create this account, and the storage bucket where the tetration agent is stored, like all this good stuff done for you. So it's a copy-paste exercise. And within this lab guide, we provided a whole bunch of content around just technology concepts and definitions to help lay a foundation if you're not familiar with this whole new landscape of cloud native application development. But if you are, you can jump right into the meat of it, and that's what we're going to do now. We're going to go to the implementing security section, specifically right to tetration. And then within the tetration section, we covered a lot of topics, including integration into AWS and Kubernetes. But I've already done that pre-work for this demo. I want to focus in on an example of how you do the application segmentation with tetration in a Kubernetes environment. In this case, we're actually using Ansible to do that. But before we get into that, I want to show you what it's like to simulate some east-west lateral movement from a front-end service. So we're going to leverage our kubectl to take a look at the pods that are running in our Kubernetes application. You can see here we've got a front-end service, right? All the requests are funneling in through the front-end service. Now, worst case scenario is you've got a vulnerability in there that can be exploited. And let's assume someone could get into that microservice. We're going to simulate that here. And now that I'm in, we're going to take a look around the network. We found that there's a payment microservice that we probably shouldn't have access to. So we're going to hit that one up And we are going to jump back over to the lab guide where I'll copy over this API request. So using netcat connect on port 80 and then sending in this payload results in actually us getting an authorized payment, which should never happen, right? In a real world, this front-end service should not have access to the payments microservice. What should happen is it should all flow through a different microservice where you have better security controls. But sadly, segmentation has not been set up here. But I want to show you how easy it is to set up segmentation with a Kubernetes environment using Ansible and Tetration. So we'll take a look over at this particular file here. This is a Tetration playbook that we've built for the sock shop, which is the microservice application we're running. And what's really kind of unique about how Tetration works is you can see here that we're building filters to map to workloads using not IP addresses, but things like tags from AWS, or in this case, actually using pod names, or as making sure that it's within the right namespace within Kubernetes. So it's building your filters and your segmentation policy all based on the terminology that makes sense to app team and DevOps teams. So let's apply that playbook to define all the filters to map those workloads. All right, so this is going off via the Ansible module we have for Tetration and doing all of the configuration to create those filters. Now, once we've created those filters, we're going to want to define the policy. The policy here is another playbook that we've got. And this particular policy that we're looking at here is actually saying that any requests from the control plane private filter that we just are defining now, accessing any of the Kubernetes nodes should be allowed, right? So think about this. No longer do you have to define your segmentation topology using IP addresses, right? Because IP addresses, especially in a Kubernetes environment, mean very little. So Tetration does all that translation to map the metadata about applications to the IP addresses that it knows about based on the agent that runs in the Kubernetes nodes. So now that the filters are defined, we're going to go ahead and use that playbook to define our policy. Now, what's happening as we define this policy within Tetration, it is creating the appropriate rules to be applied, in our case using IP tables on our Linux-based Kubernetes nodes, and is updating IP tables to actually block and allow access in a dynamic fashion. So as new pods spin up, Tetration's policy engine builds new policies that get pushed back down to the agent, and it all happens without any bit of blip in the radar. The applications continue to maintain their uptime without any type of interference to their behavior. And once the policy is rendered and pushed down, things like we talked about before with the east-west traffic between the front-end server and things like the payment service would actually be blocked. And what's really cool is this policy, because it's agnostic of, it's not saying, if you noticed here within this policy definition, it's kube nodes in the control plane. It's not saying within a particular cloud. So let's say you moved your Kubernetes cluster and your application from one cloud to another, from your private data center to your public data center. It's irrelevant. Tetration will follow that application and workload as it moves and continue to apply that policy. And that goes back to the point, the use case we're talking about, really adaptive security, right? Your applications are so dynamic, you need security tools that can be dynamic too. So as simple as that, by leveraging Ansible and Tetration, I can go ahead and segment all of the east-west traffic in my Kubernetes cluster without much of a sweat. And now that policy is going to take effect and stay even as that application moves around. And that's the whole principle behind an application-first security solution, right? Making sure that you're tackling the hard problems in a way that makes it really easy, adaptable to your application environment, and continuously there to protect you. So have fun building your apps, knowing that they can be secured without busting a sweat. Thanks much. Have a great day.